right, tell me. What's going on in chapter 24? We read it together kind of in class the other day.
Oh,
There's some ladies talking, Riley.
the gossip group gets together and they start talking, and then they were supposed to be like a missionary meeting, but then they started talking about like how all the poor people in Africa and like, and then they were talking about like what's his face's wife and how they
Yeah,
Tom Robinson's wife.
yeah. That's exactly it. So they're talking pityingly about these poor people in Africa. Meanwhile, what is happening in their own backyard?
The same thing.
Basically the same thing, but maybe even worse. People are actively being oppressed, and do they care about that? No. We got just through my least favorite paragraph. Yeah.
And they were complaining about the people complaining.
They were complaining about the people complaining because they said complaining is not what?
Jesus-like.
It's not Jesus-like. Jesus wouldn't complain about something so silly as slavery and racism and deep, deep, deep injustice. Am I right, you guys? So we left off on the bottom of page 310. Who do we think that Harper Lee is kind of making fun of in this chapter? Church people. Specifically, which gender of church people? Did you say women's? Women's. Yeah, that's fair. All right, cool. I'm gonna read to us. We'll stop every now and then, and I'm gonna make you tell me what's important about a couple different things. Cool? Top of page 311. I was reminded of the ancient little organ in the chapel at Finch's Landing. When I was very small, and if I had been very good during the day, Atticus would let me pump its bellows while he picked out a tune with one finger. The last note would linger as long as there was air to sustain it. Mrs. Merriweather had run out of air, I judge, and was replenishing her supply while Mrs. Farrow composed herself to speak. Mrs. Farrow was a splendidly built woman with pale eyes and narrow feet. She had a fresh, permanent wave, and her hair was a mess of tight gray ringlets. She was the second most devout lady in Maycomb. She had a curious habit of prefacing everything she said with a soft, sibilant noise. Grace, she said. It's just like I was telling Brother Hudson the other day. Brother Hudson, I said, looks like we're fighting a losing battle. A losing battle, I said, doesn't matter to him one bit. We can educate him till we're blue in the face. We can try till we drop to make Christians out of them. But there's no lady safe in her bed these nights. Is that the lesson that we should be learning from the Tom Robinson case? No! Ladies. He said to me, Mrs. Farrow, I don't know what we're coming down to. Coming down here. So I told him that was certainly a fact. Mrs. Merriweather nodded wisely. Her voice soared over the clink of coffee cups and the soft bovine sound. I think that's so. Do you know what bovine means?
Yeah.
It's like cow-like, like cattle-like. Like you describe cows as like cows are bovine, and so she's saying like the soft bovine sounds of the ladies munching their dainties, which is basically Scout just like being like, they sound like cows. It's like, I love Scout so much. Gertrude, she said, I tell you there are some good but misguided people in this town. Good but misguided. Folks in this town who think they're doing right, I mean. Now, far be it from me to say who, but some of them in this town thought they were doing the right thing a while back, but all they did was stir them up. That's all they did. Might have looked like the right thing to do at the time. I'm sure, I don't know. I'm not red in that field, but sulky, dissatisfied. I tell you, if my Sophie had kept it up another day, I'd have let her go. It's never entered that wool of hers that the only reason I keep her is because this depression's on and she needs her $1.25 every week she can get it. Who is she talking about there? Who is the person who thought they were doing the right thing but really just, what? Atticus! She's talking trash about Atticus. So even if we weren't already annoyed at her, how do we feel about Mrs. Merriweather?
It's disrespectful to talk bad about someone in their house.
Yes, it's disrespectful to talk bad about someone in their house. Absolutely. And also, who's like the best character in this whole book? And yet here she is, and she's like, well, he thought he was doing the right thing, but really all it did was just rile those black people up. Because her life would be easier if the black people weren't complaining, because the black people are complaining about justice, and justice means things need to change, and she doesn't want her life to change, and so therefore, Atticus is a bad person. Do we follow her logic?
No.
I mean, like, it can make sense to us, but I hope that we're grumpy at her. I'm grumpy at her. And then, his food doesn't stick going down, does it? Who's his? Again? Whose food are they eating? Whose house are they in? And who are they trash talking? Miss Maudie said it. Two tight lines had appeared at the corners of her mouth. She had been sitting silently beside me, her coffee cup balanced on one knee. I had lost the thread of conversation long ago when they quit talking about Tom Robinson's wife and had contented myself with thinking of Finch's Landing in the river. Aunt Alexandra got it backwards. The business part of the meeting was blood-curdling. The social hour was dreary. Maudie, I'm sure I don't know what you mean, said Mrs. Merriweather. I'm sure you do, Miss Maudie said shortly. Okay, so here's what I want to point out here. Riley, is that a question or are you just...
Yeah, question.
What's up?
Why are they at Atticus's house?
Because Aunt Alexandra invited them over.
God, that's true.
Yep, because she wanted to host, because it's like a thing, like this missionary circle is like a thing, they just like trade whose house it's at, and that's a very good question, Riley, thank you. We talked on Monday about how these ladies are, like what it means to be a lady to them, right? So what does it mean to be a lady to them?
Gotta be clean.
What?
Gotta be clean.
You gotta be clean and put together and smell good. Scout is afraid of them. What aspect of women is Scout afraid of that we talked a little bit about on Monday? Did they come right out and say what they're thinking? They're judgy, but like subtly judgy, right? We have right here, I would say a contrast. I could also say a contradiction. I might even say a contrast and a contradiction between what it means to be a lady according to those ladies and who's the contrast. Who is being different? Who is not being subtle? Who's standing up and saying something clearly? Miss Maudie! And so like we have this like contrast right here of you have these ladies who are like really put together and they're kind of saying mean things under their breath and they're kind of saying it subtly and they're not coming out and saying anything. And then you have Miss Maudie who says, his food doesn't stick going down, does it? And then she says, I'm sure you do, right? She refuses to play their games. That's kind of like the big contrast of this chapter. And I would say something else for us to keep watching. She said no more. When Miss Maudie was angry, her brevity was icy. Something had made her deeply angry, and her gray eyes were as cold as her voice. Mrs. Merriweather reddened, glanced at me, and looked away. I could not see Mrs. Farrow. Aunt Alexandra got up from the table and swiftly passed more refreshments, neatly engaging Mrs. Merriweather and Mrs. Gates in brisk conversation. When she had them well on the road with Mrs. Perkins, Aunt Alexandra stepped back. She gave Miss Maudie a look of pure gratitude, and I wondered at the world of women. That right there, honestly, that's like a tough question. Scout is wondering, what is women? Like that's like what she's like, what even are these creatures? Like, what does it mean to be a woman? What are they doing? Scout is asking herself like a tough question right now. Like, Scout doesn't understand what's happening, but it's also not an easy to answer question, right? Like, do any of you feel like you could describe women in like one sentence or less?
No, because it's like just like shoving them in a box and saying they're all
Okay, well,
women.
yeah, and also because I would say women are impossible. As one, I would say that. And so Scout is like, what is this? What's up, Riley?
I got it. Older girls. That's the definition of what?
You really should teach this class.
No.
Oh, okay.
I think shit.
Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandra had never been especially close, and here Auntie was silently thanking her for something. For what I knew not, I was content to learn that Aunt Alexandra could be pierced sufficiently to fear gratitude for help given. There was no doubt about it. I must soon enter this world where on its surface fragrant ladies rocked slowly, fanned gently, and drank cool water. But I was more at home in my father's world. People like Mr. Hecate did not trap you with innocent questions to make fun of you. Even Jem was not highly critical unless you said something stupid. Ladies seemed to live in faint horror of men, seemed unwilling to approve wholeheartedly of them, but I liked them. There was something about them, no matter how much they cussed and drank and gambled and chewed, no matter how undelectable they were, there was something about them I instinctively liked. They weren't hypocrites, Mrs. Perkins. Born hypocrites, Mrs. Merriweather was saying. At least we don't have that sin on our shoulders down here. Who wants to tell me why I stopped talking? Go, Lauren! Because she's one herself. This whole paragraph, we see how hypocritical they are, right? Where they like care about people who are far away in Africa and don't care about the people who are right next to them. They can't see like a lack of justice. It's like smacking them in the face. And here she is, and she's like, other people are hypocrites. And I'm sure that like if you're like me, then you're reading that and you're like, she is such a hypocrite. And what do you think Harper Lee wants me to do as I'm reading this book? sticky note it may be, but what's the question that Harper Lee wants me to ask myself? As I'm pointing a finger at Mrs. Merriweather, what does she want me to do? Am I being a hypocrite? I'm not, but like you guys are, and like you should think about that. That was a joke. That was, okay, whatever. Guys, I'm being really funny right now. People up there set them free, but you don't see them sitting at the table with them. At least we don't have the deceit to say it to them, yes, you're as good as us, but stay away from us. Down here, we just say, you live your way and we'll live ours. I think that woman, that Mrs. Roosevelt's lost her mind, just plain lost her mind coming down to Birmingham and trying to sit with them. If I was mayor of Birmingham, well, neither of us was the mayor of Birmingham, but I wish I was the governor of Alabama for one day. I'd let Tom Robinson go so quick, the Missionary Society wouldn't have time to catch its breath. This is a moment where I actually really love Scout, right? Because she doesn't understand all the political stuff. She doesn't understand, like, she just is like, Tom Robinson didn't do it, so we should let him go. Like, that's a moment where, like, her innocence is like, she gets it in a way that these ladies don't. Calpurnia was telling Miss Rachel's cook the other day how bad Tom was taking things, and she didn't stop talking when I came to the kitchen. She said there wasn't a thing Atticus could do to make being shut up easier for him, that the last thing he said to Atticus before they took him down to the prison camp was, "Goodbye, Mr. Finch. There ain't nothing you can do now, so there ain't no use trying." Calpurnia said Atticus told her that day they took Tom to prison, he just gave up hope. She said Atticus tried to explain things to him, that he must do his best not to lose hope, because Atticus was going to do his best to get him free. Miss Rachel's cook asked Calpurnia, why didn't Atticus just say, yes, you'll go free and leave it like that? Seemed like that'd be a big comfort to Tom. Calpurnia said, because you ain't familiar with the law. First thing you learn when you're in a law and family is that there ain't any definite answers to anything. Mr. Finch couldn't say something so when he didn't know for sure it's so. The front door slammed, and I heard Atticus's footsteps in the hall. Automatically, I wondered what time it was. Not nearly time for him to be home, and on Missionary Society days, he usually stayed downtown until black dark. Actually, I want to go back to that last paragraph for a second. Why did Tom Robinson say, goodbye, Mr. Finch, there ain't nothing you can do now? What has Tom Robinson basically done? He's given up. What is a court supposed to do? At its heart, what is a court there for? Justice, right? To find who is innocent and who is guilty. Did the court do its job in this case? Not even a little bit. If you were Tom Robinson, would you have hope in that system?
No.
I'm not even a little bit, right? And like I'm gonna be honest with you and say that like I think that the problems like this are not totally gone in this book, and we're gonna talk more about that later, but like issues like this where our justice system does not in fact find justice are still around in 2020, and there are like echoes of this even today, which sucks. He being Atticus, he stopped in the doorway. His hat was in his hand, his face was white. Excuse me, ladies, he said, go right ahead with your meeting and don't let me disturb you. Alexander, could you go to the kitchen a minute? I want to borrow Calpurnia for a while. He didn't go through the dining room, but went down the back hallway and entered the kitchen from the rear door. Aunt Alexandra and I met him. The dining room door opened again, and Miss Maudie joined us. Calpurnia had half risen from her chair. Cal, Atticus said, I want you to go with me out to Helen Robinson's house. What's the matter? Aunt Alexandra asked, alarmed by the look on my father's face. Tom's dead. Aunt Alexandra put her hands to her mouth. They shot him, said Atticus. He was running. It was during their exercise period. They say he just broke into a blind, raving charge of the fence and started climbing right in front of them. Didn't anybody try to stop him? Didn't they give him any warning? Aunt Alexandra's voice shook. Oh, yes, the guards called him to stop. They fired a few shots in the air and then to kill. They got him just as he went over the fence. They said if he'd had 2 good arms, he'd have made it. He was moving that fast. 17 bullet holes in him. They didn't have to shoot him that much. Cal, I want you to come out with me and help me tell Helen. Why did Tom Robinson run? Yeah, because what else was he supposed to do? I think, Riley, that's exactly what else was he supposed to do? Is there any chance in Tom Robinson's mind that the justice system is going to, even on an appeal, are they going to let him off? Is he going to be found innocent? No. Is he going to make it over that fence, probably? No, but he almost did, right? And so he decided to take his chance trying to hop that fence rather than continue believing in this system that has failed him and failed him and failed him and failed him. And now here comes maybe a harder question. How many times do you have to shoot somebody before they die? It depends. What does it depend on? Where you shoot them, yeah. So what do we, like, yeah, why do you say it's not 17, Ian?
Because that's how many times they shot him, showing that it wasn't really about stopping him.
I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I think there are a couple different answers to this, and I want to see what we come up with. Turn to the person next to you, and why did they shoot Tom Robinson 17 times? Talk about that for a second.
I got cut off.
There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but yeah, go. Why did they shoot him 17 times?
But I feel like even racist people wouldn't shoot someone 17 times unless they're like 100% don't like the stuff or anything.
So give me some theories. Why might they have shot Tom Robinson 17 times? Is it racism?
Maybe they had like 3 boys and they were like pop, 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 like 3 shots each.
So maybe,
Maybe about like 17, maybe about like 6 people. They all shot about 2 or 3 times maybe.
yeah, maybe it's a whole bunch. Maybe in this tiny, tiny town, they have that many men at this tiny, tiny prison watching this like one prisoner they have, and maybe everyone shot them. That's a valid, absolutely. Tell me, Ashley, what do you think?
I feel like they just saw no value in him. That like, if you were to like want him to stop, could have shot him once in the leg
Mm-hmm.
to like get him to just stop. But 17 times.
17 times feels like a message almost, right? So here's the other theory behind this. So one, maybe they saw no value, maybe they're trying to make a message, maybe they're just angry and so they shoot him 17 times. The other is this, and this is something that is true to this day. We have an idea, a bias, that black men are basically invincible. And this is something that like happens over and over. Like you see it in the news when people are shot. They've also done studies that show that like in hospitals, non-racist doctors and nurses give less pain medicine to black men and women than to white men and women because we have this like inherent bias that black people are invincible, that their pain tolerance is higher, that they are harder to injure or to hurt. This is something that like has to be trained out of police officers, is like this idea that like black people are invincible. It's like also why you see so many like young black men shot, because we have this idea that like young black men are older and more powerful than they actually are. And so like one theory is, as much as they have looked down on him, in some ways like they thought he was like superhuman, right? Like he's this creature that needs to be shot 17 times because he's unstoppable otherwise. Either way, I think like speaks to the bias that we like, and that's one that we still have today. So that's actually something that we're going to talk more about. But like either way, whether it's they see no value or like in a weird way they see too much value, like they shot this human being 17 times because they were afraid of him. I don't know. It's horrifying. We should be horrified. We're going to come back to this moment a lot, probably, so I would have something there so we can refer back to her later. This is Cal talking. Yes, she murmured, fumbling at her apron. Miss Maudie went to Calpurnia and untied it. This is the last straw, Atticus, and Alexandra said. Depends on how you look at it, he said. What was one Negro more or less among 200 of them? He wasn't Tom to them. He was an escaping prisoner. Which again, he goes back to what Ashley said. He wasn't a human. He wasn't Tom Robinson. He was just an escaping prisoner. Atticus leaned against the refrigerator, pushed up his glasses, and rubbed his eyes. We had such a good chance, he said. I told him what I thought, but I couldn't in truth say we had more than a good chance. I guess Tom was tired of white men's chances and preferred to take his own. Ready, Cal? Yes, sir, Mr. Finch. Then let's go. Aunt Alexandra sat down in Calpurnia's chair and put her hands to her face. She was quite still. She was so quiet, I wondered if she would faint. I heard Miss Maudie breathing in as if she had just climbed the steps, and in the dining room the ladies chattered happily. I thought Alexandra was crying, but when she took her hands away from her face, she was not. She looked weary. She spoke, and her voice was flat. Can't say I approve of everything he does, Maudie, but he's my brother, and I just want to know when this will ever end. Her voice rose. It tears him to pieces. He doesn't show it much, but it tears him to pieces. I've seen him when... What else do they want from him, Maudie? What else? What does who want, Alexandra? Miss Maudie asked. I mean, this town. They're perfectly willing to let him do whatever they're afraid themselves to do. It might lose him a nickel. They're perfectly willing to let him wreck his health doing what they're afraid to do. And what are they afraid to do? The entire town is afraid to do what? What has Atticus done that the people are afraid to do? Stand up for what they know is wrong. What she is implying here is that at least some people in this town know that what they're doing is wrong. And why don't they stand up? Because Atticus is doing it. They are more than happy to let Atticus do it for them. Because if she says they are too afraid to do themselves, it might lose them a nickel. She's saying it might cost them something. There are very few passages in this book that speak to me as much as that one does. Because I know that there are issues in the world, and I see them, and it's pretty easy for me to let other people champion those causes and change the world. Because the truth is, if I want to be a part of that, it's going to cost me something, and that's terrifying. And I think that's exactly what Alexandra is naming there. Be quiet, I'll hear you, said Miss Maudie. If you ever thought of it this way, Alexandra, whether Maycomb knows it or not, we're paying the highest tribute we can pay a man. We trust him to do right. It's that simple. Which I think is beautiful. We trust him to do right. Who? Aunt Alexandra never knew she was echoing her 12-year-old nephew. The handful of people in this town who say that fair play is not marked white only, the handful who say a fair trial is for everybody and not just us, the handful of people with enough humility to think when they look at a Negro, there but for the Lord's kindness am I. Miss Maudie's old Christmas was returning. The handful of people in this town with background, that's who they are. You remember talking about fine folks a little bit? This is basically, she's getting at that same idea, right? Background and fine folks, and also don't worry, we're almost done. I know we're getting antsy because this is a long time, so still. This is kind of the same idea, right? Do you remember before what the definition of fine folks was? Alexandra gave us a definition. The Yules technically fit into this definition. Do you remember her definition at all of what does it take to be like a fine folk? What? To have background, aka your family's been around for a long time, right? Your family has owned the same land for a lot of time. So the Yules technically are fine folks. Here, we're getting a different definition of what it means to have background. Turn to the person next to you and tell them, according to that paragraph at the bottom of page 316, what does it take to have background? Talk about that for a second. You might have to reread that paragraph just to get there. All right, so what does it take to have background? Is it as simple as your family has been around for a long time? What does it take to have background? Is it a hard question? Do I need to rephrase it? Or are we just sleepy and don't want to say anything? I mean, it's right there. Give me some examples. In order to have background, what do you have to do? Somebody just read it to me. It literally tells you right there. To have humility, okay. A handful of people who what? Say a fair trial is for everybody. What does that mean? In order to have background, what do you have to believe? Everybody is a person, everybody is equal. A handful of people with enough humility to think when they look at a Negro, there but for the Lord's kindness am I. These people have to have the willingness to put themselves in someone else's shoes. The handful of people in this town who have background are the handful of people who are willing to put themselves in someone else's shoes and to see that every human has value. So what does it mean to be a fine folk according to Miss Maudie? It means see everyone as a person. It means empathy. What does it mean to be a fine folk? Be empathetic. Had I been attentive, I would have had another scrap to add to Jim's definition of background, but I found myself shaking and couldn't stop. I had seen Enfield Present Farm, and Atticus had pointed out the exercise yard to me. It was the size of a football field. Stop that shaking, commanded Miss Maudie, and I stopped. Get up, Alexander, we've left him long enough. Aunt Alexandra rose and smoothed the various whalebone ridges along her hips. She took her handkerchief from her belt and wiped her nose. She patted her hair and said, "Do I show it?" "Not a sign," said Miss Maudie, "because part of being a woman means what? Hiding? How you doing? Are you together again, Jean Louise? Yes, ma'am. Let's join the ladies, she said grimly. The voices swelled when Miss Maudie opened the door to the dining room. Aunt Alexandra was ahead of me, and I saw her head go up as she walked through the door. "Oh, Mrs. Perkins," she said, "you need some more coffee. Let me get it." "Calpurnia's on an errand for a few minutes, Grace," said Miss Maudie. "Let me pass you some more of those dewberry tarts. Do you want to hear what that cousin of mine did the other day? The one who likes to go fishing?" And so they went down the row of laughing women around the dining room, refilling coffee cups, dishing out goodies, as though their only regret was the temporary domestic disaster of losing Calpurnia. The gentle hum began. "Yes, sir, Mrs. Perkins, that J. Grimes Everett is a martyred saint. He needed to get married, so they ran to the beauty parlor every Sunday afternoon. As soon as the sun goes down, he goes to bed with the chickens, a crate full of sick chickens. Fred says, that's what started it. Fred says." Aunt Alexandra looked around the room at me and smiled. She looked at a tray of cookies on the table and nodded at them. I carefully picked up the tray and watched myself walk to Mrs. Merriweather. With my best company manners, I asked her if she would have some. After all, if Auntie could be a lady at a time like this, so could I. So,